Okay, so let's just dive right into it. We're going to break down one of the most audacious, just brazen fraud cases to come out of the entire COVID-19 pandemic. $250 million meant for hungry children just vanished.
The whole story really starts with this one absolutely staggering number, $250 million. And let me be really clear, this wasn't some case of bad bookkeeping or a little mismanagement. No, this was a massive, calculated, straight-up theft.
And this is where the story just gets so much more disturbing. You see, this money wasn't just pulled from some general government fund. It was stolen directly from a federal program designed to feed low-income children, kids who couldn't get their regular school meals during the pandemic lockdowns. That's who they stole from.
So it all brings up this huge question, the one we're really going to try and answer here. How on earth did this happen? How did a scheme this massive get pulled off right out in the open? How did $250 million just disappear?
All right, so first up, a perfect storm for fraud. We need to look at how the conditions were set for this kind of heist. It turns out the chaos of the pandemic didn't just cause a health crisis, it basically rolled out the red carpet for scammers. So this timeline really tells the story of how the vulnerability was created. Back in the spring of 2020, everyone was scrambling to get aid out the door, right? Well, in that rush, the government loosened up the rules. They waived crucial oversight steps, like in-person site visits. Well, that basically unlocked the door. Fast forward to 2021, and people were already blowing the whistle, reporting all sorts of suspicious activity. But it still took until 2022 for the Department of Justice to bring the first federal indictments.
And right at the center of this entire web was a single nonprofit, Feeding Our Future. Now, think of them like a middleman. They were supposed to be a trusted sponsor, the group that vets the meal providers and makes sure they're legit. Instead, they allegedly became the central hub for the entire fraud, funneling federal money to over 250 fake meal sites.
So how'd they actually do it? Let's follow the money to see the mechanics of the crime. This is where a story about poor oversight turns into a story about a truly brazen heist.
You know, the craziest part is how stunningly simple the scheme was. It was basically a four-step playbook. First, you set up fake meal sites. These could be just empty storefronts or shell companies. Second, you submit mountains of invoices for millions of meals that were never served. These were the so-called ghost meals. Third, you get huge reimbursement checks from the federal government passed right through Feeding Our Future. And finally, you launder the cash.
And the spending, wow. This just shows the sheer audacity of it all. This money wasn't carefully hidden, it was flaunted. We're talking luxury cars like Lamborghinis, international real estate, villas in Kenya, penthouses in Dubai, Rolex watches, private jet travel, and massive wire transfers to overseas accounts. Just incredible.
But this wasn't just a financial crime. Oh no. The investigation quickly spiraled into a massive political firestorm, with some really serious accusations being leveled against state and federal officials.
So this really lays out the core conflict. On one side, you have sources alleging that state officials under Governor Tim Walz were warned by whistleblowers way back in 2020, and they just failed to act. But on the other side, the governor's administration says, hey, we took decisive action as soon as the FBI presented us with a clear criminal case, and they later even created a new fraud office.
The scandal also blew up at the federal level. With the epicenter of the fraud right in her district, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar faced intense scrutiny from her political opponents. They pointed to allies and donors who were allegedly profiting and started asking questions like this one from her challenger. Were there deep ties that helped enable all this?
Now, in response to those kinds of accusations, the source material notes that Congresswoman Omar framed that line of questioning as an unfair, racist attack on her entire community, essentially saying, don't blame the many for the criminal actions of a few.
And this story quickly went national. You had former President Trump labeling Minnesota a fraud hub. Then the House GOP got involved, launching its own formal investigation through the Oversight Committee and subpoenaing documents from state officials. It became a whole thing.
So, after all the political finger-pointing and the media firestorm, what were the actual consequences? Let's take a look at the results of the massive federal investigation. The legal fallout really shows you the sheer scope of this conspiracy. Federal prosecutors charged 78 individuals in connection with the scheme. 78. And as of early 2025, they've already gotten 59 convictions, which is a remarkably high number for such a complex white-collar crime case. And we're not just talking about slaps on the wrist here. One of the key figures in this whole scheme was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and was also ordered to pay back $48 million in restitution. That's a sign of some serious personal accountability. But believe it or not, the story still isn't over, not by a long shot. There are several really serious investigations still going on. The U.S. Treasury is looking into potential links to terror financing. The House Oversight Committee's investigation is still active, and there's talk that federal prosecutors might even bring more severe charges, like for racketeering.
So this whole episode really leaves us with a critical question for the future, right? Because when the next crisis hits, and there will be a next one, and there's a rush to get aid to people who desperately need it, what safeguards can we put in place? How do we balance that need for speed with a kind of strong oversight needed to stop history from repeating itself on such a massive scale?